When I first heard the term desertification, I thought it was something completely different. I had an image in my mind of cookies and pies and cakes. Thought perhaps maybe it's a government-sanctioned program to bring strawberry shortcake to the masses. Unfortunately, desertification is not that. Simply put by ecologist Alan Savory, desertification is a fancy word for land that is turning to desert. And this only happens when we create too much bare ground. I soon found out that desertification is a big problem for our planet. And I believe that by sharing what I've learned with you and becoming aware of the causes, effects, and victims of desertification, we will have a chance at reversing the damage that it has caused. See, we only have one planet. This is it. We have a choice to make now as to what kind of planet we're going to leave behind for future generations. I do have a limited amount of time, so I can only touch upon the causes and effects of desertification briefly. This will include concepts in geography, ecology, and anthropology, more specifically desertification's relationship with climate change, water issues, and famine. Lastly, I will share with you some of the ways people are fighting desertification. The direct cause of desertification is the removal of vegetation from the soil. This is done in the name of production of food and fibers from the soil by humans for humans. And according to the United States Census Bureau, the world's population is full of humans. We're now over 7 billion people. And please consider that 30% of our land is, 30% of our planet is land, and we're projected to be to 10 billion people in the next 30 years. This whole time we've been farming, cultivating, and shaping the land since the dawn of civilization. And so much has changed in the last 200 years since the Industrial Revolution. Well, back then, people lived in rural agrarian societies. Well, then they went and they moved and concentrated in cities where the jobs in the factories were. Well, our wild herd and grazing activity changed from nomadic and mobile to one that was quite sedentary. See, our agricultural models have changed along with it as well. See, the practices are no longer based on small farms producing a multitude of things. We now have these large factory farms that produce one thing. And now we're left with too much livestock concentrated in grazing on too little land. You have the growing needs of a population, though, and they're demanding logging for construction or lumber or fuel wood. See, we're stripping the land even further. And when this unprotected earth loses its topsoil to the wind or erosion or flash flooding, well, now we end up having this exposed ground that just bakes in the sun and it turns to hardpan. See, the rapid growth of our world's population and the rising demand for resources and the sprawl of our agricultural practices, they've affected all living things. Some of these effects of desertification, such as climate change, water issues, and famine, they're wide-spanning and devastating. Let us briefly look now at some of the damaging results of desertification. If you clear off 1 square yard of soil and, just remove it of all of its vegetation, that plot of soil is going to be considerably cooler in the morning and considerably hotter at midday. But you take that same square yard of soil and add some sort of litter, like whether it be mulch or foliage, well, you've now insulated it, not unlike a garden. And what we're doing then is we're adjusting the microclimate. Well, what we actually are doing on a planet level or global level is we are adjusting the macroclimate. Half the world's forests have already been destroyed, and 1/3 of the Earth's surface is already exposed. So really, it's not unlike that uncovered garden that's cool in the morning and hot at midday, but we're just practicing it now on a global scale. See, this lack of vegetation and root systems in the soil, see, that also now damages and affects our water supply. See, with that bare soil, the carbon in the water, that just evaporates quickly off the barren land. And along with it, the water affects the lack of water affects the salinity of the soil, and it renders the soil just useless for future crops. When you have no vegetation, plus you add heavy rain, well, then you also end up with flooding. And this erodes the soil even more. And then you end up with people and wildlife either killed or displaced. See, this rapidly growing population, it's outstripped any gains that we've made in the food supply in some regions of the world, and it's produced devastating famines throughout the planet. See, these are places that are suffering the worst because they don't import food. They rely on all the food they eat to be gained from their harvest. So displaced peoples and wildlife from floods or places that aren't producing food, they concentrate to areas that are already strained for their resources. And desertification then at those areas makes it impossible for the soil to provide food on a large scale. So you end up with too many people on too little land, and that strains a very delicate and few resource that they have there. See, issues like climate shifts, water management, famine, they're intimidating to grapple with. However, there is hope with some of the methods that are being developed in practice today. Whether it's through afforestation and tree planting programs, or practicing responsible water management, or management of livestock and grazing herds. Take China, India, Vietnam, and US for example. They have now added more than 7 million hectares of new forest annually through their replanting programs. Brazil and Indonesia, who had the highest rate of deforestation in the 1990s, even they are implementing afforestation programs now. Israel has one of the most impressive water conservation practices in the world. 50% of their irrigated water comes from recycled wastewater. The next closest is Spain, with distant second place, mind you, at 20%. Managing our livestock and our herds, and our grazing herds, has become a very important way of battling deforestation. Well, one thing that we need to do is we need to understand the niche that herds fit into. See, herds, they herd together because of defense of predators. See, by themselves, livestock are easy pickings, so they herd together, and when they are migrating, not only they defecate and urinate and tamp down the place that they're eating, well, they end up migrating in further defense of predators. And what they've proven, though, is that what they do to the soil is good. The tamping down of the vegetation, that insulates the soil. Plus, it also embeds the root systems further deeper into the soil, and it also allows new growth to not have to compete with the growth that's already above it. So you end up with, fresher, newer growth. Through the defecation, urination, and salivation that add nutrients to the soil when left behind. The father of the holistic management system, grassland management system, is a gentleman named Alan Savory. He's a white African that has been investigating and teaching and fighting desertification for like the last 50 years. And some of his work is quite remarkable, and I have a couple slides here to show some before and after. In conclusion, I've covered quite a bit of ground here in the last 7 minutes, and I hope you know now that desertification has many facets, and the seed of its destructive effects were planted when humans took dominion over the land and livestock on a grand level. Now, desertification is directly responsible for climate change, water issues, and famine. Thankfully, there are people that are dedicating their lives to understanding and reversing these tragedies. How do we utilize the land for development and agriculture? How do we face the problems of famine or climate change? How do we deal with the rising world population? These are complex questions. However, understanding that desertification is largely a product of our choices will remind us that we have control of where we go from here. Thank you.